I put off watching Kurokan for a long time because I thought it would be terrible, and it hit all of my expectations. The motion capture CGI for the most part looks awful, playing like a rough draft of a poor-selling sports game. The adherence to the original comic book style quite literally makes this a moving manga, and the quick cuts and bright flashes of color attempt to make the transitions more dynamic but just clutter up the frame with seizure-inducing images. And some surprises added to my original distaste, most notably the main character's toxic personality and the show's casual approval of domestic violence and child abuse. If I made a list of things I hate in sports anime, this show would check a lot of the boxes. And yet, I don't think I hate this show. I may actually like it. It's true that the animation is consistently ugly, but the motion capture gives Kurokan added detail that most 2D shows can't hit. It's true that this show preaches the merits of a structure that demonizes women, children, and the poor, but it also examines the dark side of an amateur sports world that goes largely unaddressed. Most of all, Kurokan demonstrates the hypocrisy of those in power and how much the smallest bit of glory can erode the integrity of people in charge. Kurokan presents a lot of captivating ideas, and it also looks terrible, sounds terrible, and feels terrible. So, is this show bad or good? Let's address the bad first. After watching just a few seconds of the trailer, I concluded that this is the ugliest show I had ever seen, and I needed to find out who was responsible for this project. Turns out that Kurokan was not made by a small Japanese production studio, but by the Taiwanese giant Next Media Animation, most famous in this country for producing those raunchy Super Bowl previews a few years back, and a fake news report of the royal wedding featured on The Daily Show. Apparently, they also made a handful of anime between 2012 and 2014, none of them even cracking the top 4,000 most popular anime according to My Anime List. Being a generally anti-establishment studio that didn't have to adhere to Japanese production schedules gave Next Media Animation an opportunity to produce Kurokan outside of norms. The length of each episode fluctuates between 9 and 18 minutes long, which greatly benefits the pacing as no episode feels longer than it needs to be. The show also addresses taboos that a lot of baseball anime ignore or address only in passing to maintain mainstream viability. Most notably, while this show does some 2D animation stills and backgrounds and scene transitions, the vast majority of the scenes are animated using motion capture CGI, which even today would be incredibly ambitious. And it's ambitious for a reason. The animation is painfully ugly, especially the baseball scenes with macro movements that look stiff and robotic. The crowd shots hover over sets of cardboard cutout people, and all the nature shots look not bucolic, but how a 4-year-old might think nature would look like. But the motion capture does do one thing impressively with the impeccably detailed facial movements. I don't think I've ever seen an animated production outside of a Pixar film where the characters look like their mouths are actually moving along with the words. But this show captures that motion flawlessly. If only the CGI could capture its characters' macro movements as well as their micro movements, then maybe it would stand a chance at not looking like garbage. Of course, any show can overcome bad animation with a good story. This studio's history of envelope pushing also gives the show a unique opportunity to say things that most baseball anime can't, and Kurokan does that. Kind of. The story begins with a power struggle amongst members of the board of a local high school, arguing over whether to retain their successful and controversial head coach Kurokan, or hand the reins to the more conservative and agreeable coach-in-waiting. Kurokan and his assistant manage the team despite their own internal scuffles, and the dissatisfaction even bleeds into some of the players who don't agree with their coach's unorthodox approach to the game. This show establishes its strongest themes early on: the conflict between those with power and those without, and the sacrifice of doing what's right as the price of victory. In this sense, Kurokan gets a lot right that a lot of similar shows don't. All the shady parts of amateur sports that don't get addressed in most shows, like recruiting and backhanded deals and child abuse, play out in the daylight here. Kurokan also nails the unfairness of the disproportionate attention paid to amateur athletics in lieu of academics, and even gets right small details like the players' haircuts and uniforms that most anime don't bother to address. And while this show doesn't even come close to crossing the line like the studio's previous work, compared to most baseball anime, this might as well be shown on Adult Swim. If you're able to get past the animation and lose yourself in the story, there's a worthwhile examination of high school baseball culture within Kurokan. For most shows, this would be enough to overcome its aesthetic flaws, but this one has a bigger problem to contend with. See, what ultimately dooms Kurokan is Kurokan. Our main character is unquestionably an anti-hero. Whether you like him or not is ultimately up to you, but what you're not supposed to do is judge his behavior as redeeming and beneficial to his players and loved ones, which this show unfortunately does. The bad stuff starts with Kurokan conditioning a player into behaving like a mindless robot whose only task is to pitch as much as he can without thinking. Perhaps this is a true representation of abusive coaching in amateur sports, but it's nonetheless abusive. Of course, Kurokan doesn't get punished for this behavior, but gets called a genius when this player turns into an effective starting pitcher. He also has no problem putting his hands on his players, throwing them into a river, and tying them to a tree and flinging literal cow shit at them. But hey, his baseball teams win, so I guess all is forgiven. To be fair, there are plenty of coaches who act like this. Overwork and hazing are such a problem in Japanese amateur baseball that the managing director of the country's largest youth baseball league just this year called sports a quote-unquote hidden but systemic form of child abuse. Kurokan can't be blamed for accurately portraying the toxic behavior of a coach protected by a toxic system. But that it doesn't punish and actually rewards its hero for his abhorrent actions makes it an irresponsible portrayal of high school baseball. But I can't say for sure whether that makes this show bad. On one hand, it's ugly, and it enables its abusive main character. On the other hand, it just might provide the most realistic portrayal of the big-time amateur sports experience of any anime. It's kind of hard to feel indifferent about this show. I imagine most people would hate it, but baseball fans might find a lot to love in its unique approach to the game. Ultimately, I can't recommend this show, not because I think it's bad, but because it's terribly difficult to find and super unpopular. Why bother wasting your time on something that no one's watched anyway? Maybe if it were a diamond in the rough, you should give it a shot, but unfortunately, Kurokan is a diamond within its own steaming pile of cow shit.